In a journal entry that might have taken them 3 hours to pull together from the different sources, we've now built it where you press a button, it spits out an exception report if there's data you need to look at, and then boom, you fix the underlying data and the journal entry is ready to be posted. Because if we can spend less time doing the operational things like mentioned this morning, let's invert that pyramid and spend more time on the strategic things.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. So one more panel before we get into our closing keynote for the day. My name is Megan Lynn Gibbons. I'm Head of Solutions and Enterprise Success here at Ramp. And I'm so honored to be leading today's panel alongside our wonderful guests. We're going to be talking about finance and AI. What else would we be here for, right? So our discussion topics today are going to center around the shift from discipline-only finance into a practice that is technology-enabled leadership. And this is a rapidly changing landscape. So there's systems that are smarter than ever, tools that are more prolific, and alongside real-time data, more automation. Where does that leave us? And it's driving a lot of change and reshaping finance, hiring, alongside organizational behavior and goals. So we hope, actually, that today's session, the panel conversation, is going to skew a bit more tactical. We want to hear from these leaders on stage next to me what exactly they're already implementing, what challenges they have, what are they thinking about. And we hope that some of this will be ideas that you might take home to implement or think about in your own organizations. And if not that, change is daunting. So at least get some comfort in knowing that you're not the only leader in the room thinking about tech adoption these days. So with that, we'll start with a moderated discussion and also have some time toward the end, about 10, 15 minutes for moderated for some Q&A. So if you have questions to ask, please make sure to raise your hand towards that. I'm excited to be joined by 3 panelists, and these are existing Ramp customers, so I'll let them do their own introductions, but to quickly kick off, I have to my left Joe Horn, our VP of Controller at Zola. We have Jen Happ, VP of Transformation at US Soccer, and finally we have Karan Parekh. Did I say that right correctly?
That's right.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Karan joining us as CFO for Clay. And panelists, would you mind introducing yourself a bit? Tell us about the organizations that you represent, and kick it off with, what are you most excited to automate away in 2026? Joe?
Thank you. Yes, excited to be here. And I'm at Zola. It's a wedding registry company. We help couples plan weddings from the day they're engaged all the way through the process. And now we launched a baby registry as well. So the next logical step. I've been with the company for 8 years, and our relationship with Ramp, just to start there, is we really have, we launched in 2021 on a T&E basis and corporate spend. I remember sitting with my senior accountant a few years back when we were analyzing different tools, and we lined up 3 different companies, and Ramp being one of them, and our current tool at the time being the other. And Ramp basically won on all 5 points. So it was looking back, it was a great move for us. We've definitely expanded since then, and since we hired up to 200 at one point, we knew we needed a tool like Ramp. So as we look forward now for 2026, I think we're excited at Zola to start automating some of our financial reporting. We have a lot of different management reporting that goes out to the board and investors, KPIs, and I think as many finance people know, we live in Excel for almost everything still. So we're trying to automate things like a one-click and create reports in our systems so that we can easily just ship it out to investors and not spend too much time on it. So,
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Jen?
Hi, Jen Happ. I'm the VP of Transformation at US Soccer. So US Soccer is the governing body of soccer in America. Most of you probably know our 2 men's and women's national teams, but we actually have 25 other teams that we support. Our youth teams, our extended teams, as well as the entire soccer ecosystem. So think coaches, referees, all like the youth organizations out there. So we're really trying to grow the sport of soccer in the US. I've been with US Soccer for about 2.5 years, and we've been with Ramp probably about a little under 2.5 years, because one of my first jobs at US Soccer was to implement Ramp. They hated their old T&E platform, and I had experience with Ramp before at an old startup. So when I got hired, that was my first project, and we've been sort of growing our adoption on the card, reimbursement, bill pay, treasury side ever since. So looking forward to rolling out even more features. And I think for automation potential is a little different, but we're also excited to automate reporting. We're going to go a little different way, and we want to really enable both internal and external stakeholders with dashboards and some more visualizations, realizing not everyone loves looking at just a bunch of numbers and a chart on a page. So how can we sort of present the information to them in a hyper customizable way day. So it's giving them the information they need, and it may not be as scary as just a bunch of numbers. So one of the things we're looking forward to.
Thanks, Jen. Karan?
Hi, everyone. Karan, I lead finance at Clay. We are a AI and data-driven orchestration platform for go-to-market teams. Most businesses know what their ideal customer looks like or a customer prospect could be, whether it's someone who reached out to you via socials or visited your pricing page or perhaps posted a specific job posting. But there's unstructured data that you don't have at your fingertips that you've had to manually search for. Clay pulls in internal data with third-party data sets and AI-based data tools that we'll find to allow companies to find their ideal customer at the right moment at the right time. We have been on a journey with Ramp for several years as well and echo everything that was already said. I think the thing that we're excited about for 2026 is how do we give our teammates more context around the business accounts that they are working with, and so creating kind of a central repository of all the information that they can self-serve and access is a big initiative for us.
Fantastic. Well, I'm so excited. We prepared today's conversation with a variety of questions that we'll go through, but maybe starting more broadly with how are your organizations and teams embracing the idea of AI? A lot of this discourse started just in the past, I would say 1 to 2 years, where every single functional organization is bringing this in. And Ramp, we had the privilege of talking to a lot of organizations on how they are doing this. Customers like Notion have funds in Ramp called curiosity cards, where employees are just given a blanket budget to spend towards any use of AI and technology, whatever platform, because sometimes it's the idea that these ideas can come from parts of the organization you might not expect. So I'd love to kind of hear, and maybe Joe, we'll start with you on how are you, increasing the discovery of where this can be applied?
Sure. So first of all, the push for AI and embracing AI started with the tone at the top. Our co-CEOs made it a initiative in early 25 so that everyone at the organization, regardless of role and regardless of the team they're on, is using AI in some way or fashion. So the first thing we did was we set up, similar to what you mentioned with Notion, we actually sent out Ramp cards for every employee with $100 on it, and they would go out and sign up for Gemini courses on AI training. There were 3 courses we offered, one on just beginning AI introductory, second was more advanced for those who know more about it, and the third was on prompting and how to style prompts to get better information back in AI. So that went really well. We had 95% sign up for that. We didn't make it mandatory, but we encouraged it, across the board. The second thing we did was, and this is very simple, but we created a Slack channel called AI General. And we have a Slack channel at Zola for basically everything. We have it for, New York City team. We have, people have pets. They share pictures of their pets. This was an AI Slack channel where teams would be encouraged to share wins or losses, things that they learned and they failed on in using AI. But a lot of wins. And when people started to see this across Zola and see other teams sharing it, it basically encouraged them to do the same. So it was almost like a little bit of a friendly competition between the teams. So things like the creative team using it to create photography and iterate on photos to then put on our website. The merchandise team doing product descriptions for our items that are on our registry. So lots of good things there. And then the third thing, more specific to finance, was we set up a 2-day event called Finance Guild Days. And we took this idea from our tech team, did a similar thing a couple of years ago, where they just carved out a couple of days and worked in teams to create just creative ideas to how to enhance the Zola platform. And for finance, we said, let's list out all these areas that we spend so much time on manually today. Where can we automate it? And maybe we can implement AI in the process. So we actually just did this past week, earlier part of the week. We had 2 days where we just told the rest of the organization, we're not going to be available for these 2 days. We're working on guild days. And next week, we'll do a readout to the team. So I think it was great just to get everyone focused. Finance is one of those things where you always have a month end, deadline, due date, sending out to the board. So to carve out 2 days and just focus on these projects in teams, and we made it fun. It was really good.
That's phenomenal. And I like the idea of this Slack channel that is very public and accessible. We're very big on transparency. I I don't know why I'm sharing this. I already hesitate saying it, but you know how Eric at the beginning in our keynote quoted Covey, where it's like, the job's not finished. And here, I'm going to quote, one of my inspirations, the Ghost, who's a chef on Ratatouille, who says not everyone can be a great chef, but a great chef can be anyone. All this to say that it's interesting to solicit that these ideas, which normally may be centered across R&D teams within organizations, but really maybe it's the end users that have a stronger understanding of what exactly they need to execute. Jen or Karan, would you like to add in terms of how are your teams thinking about adoption of just technology in general?
Go ahead.
I think our team maybe is divided into two camps. We have some people who are really like new technology, like to play with all the fun things, really want to get into AI. And then we have the fearful side who we're a bunch of finance accounting people. We may not know how it's doing the math inner working. So how do we trust what's coming out of the system? And so what we're trying to do is kind of blend both sides together and bring people along and not just say, hey, anything that wants to be fun, new, try it out, stays over here. But hey, how about you try asking ChatGPT something or try to have it feed into this and have it help you understand the problem. So really bringing people along. And I think we solidified that also in our finance team we have some goals and culture values that we set at the beginning of the year. And two of them were we want continuous learning. So everyone try to learn something new this year, and also innovation. We want to promote innovation. Even if you don't know how to get something better, if you're seeing something that you're like, well, this stinks, this is manual, raise your hand, and then we can help think through, is there a better way to do this? So trying to get people a little more familiar with the tools that are on this sort of fearful side so they can identify better opportunities and then also learn the tools and process. We're not saying, hey, you have to know how to use all of these fancy tools, but if you can identify a good opportunity, baby step your way there, we can get them to maybe be a little less fearful and trustful. I have those conversations with my CFO and she's like, but how do you know it's right? I'm like, you can ask for some sources sometimes and then go through and be able to sort of fact check. So I think it's the nature of a finance person to not want to trust necessarily what you're getting fed through this engine that I can't comprehend what's going on back there. But I think with repeated use and sort of doing the back end critical thinking of, oh, this does make sense, the answer it's giving me, we're able to bring the rest of the team along with us.
I think at Clay, we think that all employees are naturally inclined to be creative and want to explore. And as finance, sometimes maybe the pull is to be more restrictive and have guardrails. And so Ramp is actually a great way for us to thread that needle, where we give every employee the flexibility via Ramp card for a few $1,000s of exploration, basically, where they can go try any AI tool that they want. So they have kind of a sandbox within which they can play. And if they ever see a tool that they need to elevate to the rest of the team, they can come and request specific budget and pull that up to the broader organization. And that's been a great way for people to have, less red tape, no kind of impediments from trying the next latest and greatest thing that might be in their zone of competence, but then also creating a mechanism for them to pull that up to the rest of the organization. I think that's one aspect of how we've tried to partner with the org on AI. Separately, we're always pushing the teams to think about what they're spending a lot of time on, some of my peers have just said, and where can we be more efficient with AI? And so one great example at Clay is we use Clay internally to not spend too much time on pre-call research. We now have, using first and third-party data, call notes that are pre-populated with customer case studies from our own website, information on our accounts, who the buyers are, what we've said to them in past calls, and actually, as of a couple of weeks ago, automated slides that are created before every call. And so we used to have reps spending 2 hours before calls or 1 hour or 45 minutes, and now they just hop on a call and they kind of have all the materials ready to go. And so I would say sometimes it's more targeted, where we know what the problem set is and we know how we can go fix that. Other times we want to just create an open lane for people to go explore.
It's interesting. And Karan, I guess, maybe in your example, you got kind of directly into how are we driving some intended result as a result of this discovery. Curious from the leaders here, are you always thinking about whether some of this exploration is in the service of productivity, or is there some value in just taking these classes, but you don't have to necessarily measure whether employees are applying it right away? Just curious how you've seen that blend.
At Clay, we don't push people to try things just for productivity. We think generally we'll find occasional moments of inspiration that can be really transformative, and they're large step changes, but they're hard to be intentional about ex ante. And so we want to create just a culture of exploration where people can try a lot of different things. There are other times where we know that there's an area where we can be more productive, and there we'll be more targeted and heads down about how we can use different tooling, AI or not, to go solve that and try to be intentional about what's the KPI or measurement that we're solving against. In the case of reps, it might be, okay, we're spending too many hours on research. Can we be more efficient and handle larger book sizes, for example? So there's a clear output that you might be solving towards. We found that to be pretty effective to have both poles effectively. And candidly, the creative side has led to maybe even some larger step changes, but those are almost always unintentional, tops down. But the employees sometimes know what they're trying to go solve for.
Jen, I remember you have also mentioned, on this idea of are you exploring for some intended outcome, or maybe it's just also to automate things that are today taking up time from your team. That's, I think, a different measure of productivity, of course. And tell me, because you've mentioned workflow automation as being a strategic initiative for your team this year. How has that maybe released some of your bandwidth for other strategic projects?
Yeah, definitely. I think some of the things we're focused on is how do we do things faster? I mean, in the accounting world, it's always time to close. So that's been one of our big focuses this year of what can we automate from our accounting team? So that way they aren't taking 20 days to close the books, they can take 9. And we had a bunch of turnover on our accounting team this past year. I think we have one person, our longest tenure is there for a year and a half. So trying to bring up to speed a whole new accounting team, learning new systems, a lot of it was, okay, as you're getting up to speed, what can I take off your plate and try to automate? So using tools like Power Query, Power Automate, hooking into our ERP using API feeds, same with Ramp. How can we pull all this data together? And in a journal entry that might have taken them 3 hours to pull together from the different sources, we've now built it where you press a button, it spits out an exception report if there's data you need to look at, and then boom, you fix the underlying data and the journal entry is ready to be posted. So we're trying to sort of identify these things along the way. So having meetings with accounting to be what sucked last month? What took you longer than needed? Great. And I've now had our controller be I think I found another thing for you to automate. And I'm great, I can't do it all, but let's train the rest of the team now so they can identify and start building some of these automations themselves. So I think that's one of the areas we're really, because if we can spend less time doing the operational things, like mentioned this morning, let's invert that pyramid and spend more time on the strategic things. Let's meet with the business to understand what they're spending on so we know what's upcoming. What do we need to accrue? What's the cash flow going to look like? Are we going to get hit with a random payment we didn't know was coming? So I think by freeing them up, and that's the stuff they don't like to do anyway, so take that out and let them actually enjoy and learn more of the business and really become more of that strategic partner. I think finance is often thought of as more the strategic partner, so we're really trying to make it where the accounting team also feels like they can go and talk to the business and really build those relationships too.
Yeah, for us, we started, I think those are great examples for accounting. On the AP side, we felt it was a little easier to start there in terms of introducing AI, just because in our business, we have 3 full-time accounts payable folks. They spend probably over 50% of their time responding to emails and tickets from thousands of vendors. And we knew that there were the same consistent questions coming in from vendors, like how to update their bank account information, how to log in, reset their account, the typical repeatable questions. So we knew we can create some sort of AI chat bot in order to respond to that. So that was one of our biggest successful areas. We freed up their schedule, maybe not even half their schedule, but maybe a little less than half their schedule on not having to respond to those repeatable inquiries. And now they can spend more time on responding to helping our CFO analyze payables and forecasting cash. So definitely has helped to free up their work and focus on maybe the more analysis side of things.
This is so interesting. I'm sure, as you probably have a lot of conversations, not only with your own teams, but probably with candidates about what is the direction and strategy of your group. To shift our conversation a little bit towards hiring, are you at all worried that you're attracting the right talent, either in the direction of people that are very AI fluent, maybe is there still an underlying need to understand the fundamental principles of what they're executing on, not just of a reliance on technology?
Yeah, I mean, just to start, I've been interviewing for a couple of open roles that we've had at Zola. And one of my questions at the end is always how have you, and these are folks that have 10 plus years of experience. So I'd like to see how are they using AI in their day-to-day jobs? It may not be, a great example that's, maybe taking up a chunk of their schedule, but at least just knowing that they can rely on AI for simple inquiries and prompts to get information. And then they're also, a lot of the candidates are asking me questions about Zola and how is Zola embracing. Yeah, they are, just to make sure that we are actually taking it seriously and thinking about it. So definitely goes both ways. I think the foundations of, like, especially in accounting and finance, like, you still want those foundations to be there. I don't know how much we're relying on AI to actually, like, do technical accounting analysis and things of that nature. But it's definitely the foundation. You want it to be there. But someone who is a good employee and a good productive employee in the finance world, if they know how to utilize AI, they'll be even better. So that's how kind of we look at it. It's a supplement to their regular day to day.
Yeah, and I would say, kind of building off of that, like, I actually think I'm okay with AI, like, doing some of the fundamentals, as long as you can still critically think on the back end. So it's like, I'm fine if you're going to use AI to, like, build your Excel formula. Like, cool. Like, maybe you don't need to learn the nuances there, but you still need to be able, at the end of the day, be like, is this giving me the right logical response? Like, I'd rather have someone thinking critically on the back end and automating, like, hey, do the debits and credits and T accounts for this. Cool. AI can actually probably do that now, but you have to still be able to sort of check your work at the end. And I think that critical thinking layer is going to become a lot more important. So, like, that's what I'm kind of trying to judge when I'm hiring, is like, how do you use tools, but then how do you also, like, validate your responses at the end? And I think it's kind of easy because people, a lot of times, I've noticed now, I'm also hiring for a few roles, is you can see their resumes that, like, they probably put my job description in through ChatGPT and spit their resume out, and, like, makes sense. But there's also, like, weird typos sometimes, or things that, like, they clearly didn't take the time to then go and through and check and look at everything, or a cover letter that doesn't have the company name quite right or something like that. So it's like, that kind of gives me the indication of, like, cool, you use tools, but you're not self-checking on the back end. So I think those are some of the areas I'm kind of looking out for. You don't necessarily have to be an AI pro, but I still need you to, like, be open to using new tools, like, want to go explore and try different things, but also that layer of just, you need to be able to sort of step back at the end of the day and, like, does this answer make sense? And I think that's going to be the fundamental that's more important than maybe knowing how to do, like, an index match in Excel or something like that.
Yeah, I think at Clay, we don't want the interview process to not be representative of the job. And the reality is our teams are using AI every day and tools every day to augment their learning and capabilities and what they're thinking about. And so for us, we're actually encouraging people when they're going through our interview process, for any take home or any question, feel free to use any AI tool and treat it as a force multiplier. And I echo kind of what we've already said. You need to have kind of the right grounding and frameworks to think through a problem critically. And then AI is an enabler to get to the answer and get to kind of the facts that you need to get to the right decision in a more expedient way. And so rather than pushing candidates to maybe avoid using these tools, I think it's natural. The future is going to be using these things every single day in all of our workflows. So go ahead, utilize those. We want to see what you can do on the job if you had those tools at your fingertips, but we're assessing for something different, which is how do you kind of wield those to get to the right answer.
Maybe this is hyper tactical, but I'm curious, like, what has maybe shifted in your interview process to be able to assess for that credibility? So I think all three of you have mentioned that it's easy to spot perhaps, like, AI-generated responses or mistakes, or mistakes that people are making because they're over-reliant on the technology, and maybe that overexposed, that they're doing it in a way that's, like, not maybe using your best judgment. Yeah. Have you noticed, like, any trends in, like, how you either ask certain questions to candidates, or how are you asking them to explain maybe, like, the process behind their work?
It depends on every role, but I think we try to get to the heart of what are we trying to solve, as opposed to, like, a specific formula or path there. And so, like, a concrete example is if in an interview for our finance team, we're thinking about designing a commission structure for our sales team, we can give you some facts in our business, and ChatGPT or some AI tool can spit out a possible framework for here's how you can compensate your people. But in the interview, we'll actually spend most of our time thinking about, like, the conflicts and the different incentives that can be at play based on a specific structure. How would you think about the pre-sale and post-sales team collaborating with each other if all the economics are going towards one and not the other? And so those questions, I think, can get to the heart of the things that are more taste and more contextual about a business, as opposed to the raw inputs of here are different sales levers that you could use. This may be one example.
I think on our end, I like to just start with, hey, talk me through a project that you helped lead from like, what was the problem? What tactically did you do? And what was the outcome? Like, it's pretty easy to spot someone who's not really dug in or really knows what they're working on, because you will not get any details as they're trying to talk through a project they've worked on. But for example, one of the candidates I just interviewed, I'm like, what's one of the projects you've recently worked on? He talked me all the way through the details of implementing a new ERP. I'm like, great, but like you talked about details, chart of accounts, things like that. So I think it's really, if you just ask them to sort of talk from beginning to end, what was your project? How did you approach the problem? Did it solve, and what was the outcome at the end? Like, give them the opportunity to tactically talk about things they've done. And I think that's a good sort of weed out of like knowing what you're talking about, and you've actually probably accomplished something good then.
Yeah, maybe just echo that quickly.
Yeah.
Like, I ask every interviewee just to teach me about something that
Yeah.
they did in their last job, and I want to come out feeling like I learned something.
Exactly.
And the answer is, if I haven't, then either you didn't like go to the depth that you needed to be really excellent at that specific thing, or you didn't communicate appropriately. Both kind of fall a little bit flat versus what we're looking for.
Yeah, agree with everything there. Just one other point on hiring that I thought of is we were hiring one of our senior director roles recently, and we had a first round, and then I was involved in the second round interview, and then we brought them back for a third round and actually did a case study, and they were asked to go home and use AI and use Gemini or any other chat GPT to come up with some information, and then our CEOs basically were peppering them with questions on it the next day. So just another like good example of AI involved directly in the hiring process.
Yeah, it's definitely, well, it sounds like a lot of people are hiring. So if any job seekers in the audience, I too am hiring, so quick chat. Maybe a different line of questioning, something that I was thinking about is this association with AI. There seems to be, of course, this rush to make sure that a lot of organizations are adopting this well. And yet when I think about the brands of certain companies on stage, so Zola, wedding, baby, this type of like intimacy and like relationship driven, same thing with US soccer. You spoke before, Jen, about the relationship between coaches and athletes being so critical to the operations of the organization. I'm curious to hear a little bit about, are there any roles you think will never be replaced by automation? And what are you trying to preserve as you adopt this technology so that you maintain kind of what's made your brand very powerful?
Happy to start. I mean, with Zola, I think we look at it two different ways. There's couples that are getting married, and typically they're in their 20s, 30s, a little more tech savvy and willing to utilize AI. Like we have a thank you cards that are sent out, and they're using AI and a tool to send those thank you cards out and draft those responses. But planning the wedding, I think it's obviously a lot of people know it's a stressful process, right? So for us, it's like keeping that personal connection with the couples to make sure that we have a human there on the other side to interact with them and walk them along the process. The other thing is we have guests that are purchasing gifts for couples. They're in their 60s, 70s, sometimes 80s, not as tech savvy. And we want to make sure from a CS standpoint that we utilize AI for a good chunk of our CS ticketing, but we want to always make sure there's a human there for them to speak to and walk them through the process. At some point, I'm sure AI will be involved in some of that CS, and they probably already are today. But having that, I think, human connection is from a couples and for a guest standpoint, I think is important for us.
Yeah, and I think at US Soccer, our main focus has not been like going broadly and saying, hey, US Soccer, we're really into AI. I think people might question that and be like, what the heck? Our teams are coached by like robots? Like, what? So I definitely don't think like our head coaches are ever going to be replaced by AI. It might save us some money, but I think that connection between a coach and a player is very important, and having some of their secret sauce in there. But we've really been focusing on internal operations to sort of use AI and automate. So whether it's like our data analysts on our sporting side, collecting all the data that we've gotten from past tournaments, feeding it through models in order to gain insights that then they can give to the coach to maybe influence some decisions on our tactics and things like that. Or our commercial team really looking at all of the data that we've received from viewership, like all of our digital platforms, and really trying to combine that together to get sort of like a holistic view of our customer. I think we're using it a lot on our internal sides, internal operations, like finance and accounting as well. But the more we can sort of automate on the back end, it frees us up to be more strategic as a whole organization and give better insights to sort of those layers where we really can't have AI. Like, yes, you've got referees on the field. Those are never going to be replaced. So it's really just trying to understand how can we automate as much as possible to give the best service level to everyone who we still sort of need that human element in order to like be good. Like, I don't think it would go over well if our men's national team coach just said, yeah, I came up with our game plan through ChatGPT. I'm like, well, no, not great. So that's not really our goal of what we're striving for, but internally we kind of do have that innovation and sort of automation culture.
I think, Clay is obviously a more AI native business. And so we don't shy away from the association with AI, but at the same time, we think go-to-market is like a fundamentally creative task. Every campaign, every play, every way to get a customer eventually gets competed away. Maybe 20 years ago it was direct mail, and 10 years ago it was Facebook ads, and all of these things have a life cycle, effectively. And so Clay is constantly pushing maybe the tension between AI and tooling being an enabler, but also having kind of a creative underbone as to how you're going to go get your customer. And even internally, like we use Clay a lot, but we've all also seen, like emails are clearly AI written and you discard immediately. And so the things we try to do with our customers is once we've identified who the right prospect is, we're not sending them a generic email. We might invite them to like a really creative event. Like, let's go film a fight scene together, Hollywood style. Like, there are things that you can do which are really memorable for your customers that don't have to be predicated by AI. AI could just be a toolkit, a single like tool in the toolkit to go identify who you should be touching.
And the answer to this question can be no, because I think, I can't imagine any of the leaders on the stage making any mistakes, but have you had to roll anything back that you've attempted? So maybe like an AI fail of sorts, where maybe you thought an application would be more productive than it ended up being, or maybe just the way it was communicated or introduced was taken differently by your audience?
Yeah, I mean, not directly for AI, but we had an automation where we were integrating our a portion of our accounts payable into our ERP, and for so long we were doing it manually, and it took a lot of time for our AP team and our senior accounting team. So we implemented this automation solution, and after a couple of months, we noticed there were a lot of failures coming through, and the sync wasn't working. We were spending more time trying to solve the errors that were happening in the sync than we were when we were doing it manually. So we had to unfortunately roll that back and kind of think it through again. So I think the lesson we learned there was making sure that you always have a backup in case the automation and sync doesn't work, right? And we knew that we can do it manually. It might take a little longer, but as long as you can still do it manually, I think experimenting, definitely doing things in sandbox, we definitely did that. I would recommend that whenever you launch anything. But yeah, if things don't work, as long as you can do it manually, then you can always go back to it and revert back to the original.
I think for us, I can't really think of a huge fail. We're still kind of in our early stages of AI, but one sort of unintended consequence I've seen is the fact that since AI is cool and new and fun to work with, a lot of people want to spend more of their time doing all that fun stuff, coming up with the new things. And the day job still needs to get done. And yeah, there's less sexy projects over here we still need to improve on, but everyone immediately wants to go work on these cool things. So it's kind of distorted prioritization, I would say. People aren't really subjectively being this should really get done first, but they're but I kind of want to work on this one. So often without that strong product management and really making sure we're focused on the right things, I think that's one of our unintended consequences is people want to work on the cool things I do too, but still there's the not as fun things that still need to get done on the day-to-day.
Yeah, maybe somewhat related. I feel like the wave of AI kind of tools has led to just more velocity at Clay, and so we're constantly seeing new projects and things and ideas that we can go pull on. And so the tension we always have is we don't want to slow down that velocity. On the other hand, when we pick up a thread and a teammate is owning a thread, we want to make sure we're pulling it all the way through and completing things out. And so that's a constant thing we're pulling between, which is, don't hold people back. But if someone's an owner on something and it's a meaningful project, let's go get that thing done and not pick up 5 different balls in the air that we're going to have to juggle and potentially drop a few on.
So it's interesting. I think that theme that you started, Jen, around unintended consequences. So Ramp this year brought on board our own in-house economist who publishes reports on different spending trends and categories. And unsurprisingly, recent reports show that the adoption of AI tools continues to grow at triple-digit rates. And this is true across our entire million users and 45,000 customers that we have. And maybe something that I'm curious about is what are your thoughts on some unintended consequences from the financial side? So some of these licenses and technology that maybe in the past you only were allocating to engineers, it sounds like based on some of the initiatives you just mentioned, you want to have broad adoption, which means needing to now purchase licenses on ELAs instead. So I'm curious from a budgeting perspective, what have you seen as trends emerge because the adoption has maybe been better than expected in a good way, but how are you also preparing your teams financially for accommodating that?
AI is like built into Clay's product, and so our spend on this is always just surprising to me, and every month it seems to reach a new high.
Yeah.
And so we've definitely had months and instances where we're like, wow, that bill is a lot larger than we expected. Like, what happened? Let's go triage that. And sometimes we find there's like some sloppiness internally around which model we're using and whether we're kind of using a model that's too expensive for the task that we needed and we have to recalibrate. I would say that that's the nature mainly of where we've been kind of surprised to the downside, which is, people have like ambition around what they want to go create. And if you don't have guardrails around, well, what do you actually need to go do that? And if you kind of overinvest in kind of the horsepower that you're working with, you can end up with a really large number. And the thing that we've done now is we've kind of had more just education internally around like what is like the task you're trying to accomplish. And if you're doing something at small scale as an individual, that's great. If you're trying to do something at a very large scale with millions of workloads, let's just make sure that we're tight about something before we hit run. And that's been pretty effective.
Yeah, similar like that. I think I've seen definitely more licensees coming through OnRamp and like people are spending, which is great. But I think people are getting ahead of where like our core IT is in terms of like, here are our policies, here's like the training so you know what you're doing, how to sort of responsibly use AI, like what data are you giving it? Like, let's make sure we're not letting like all these companies have like potentially confidential data. So I think we've sort of seen the trend in finance and we're able to kind of alert IT of like, maybe we should do an org-wide training on this so people kind of know how to responsibly use it. A lot of people like at US Soccer were not probably thought of as like, hey, is this fun tech company to go work for? So we've got a lot of people who just love the sport of soccer. So they probably didn't grow up and have like a cool education in computer science, really like all these tech tools. So you kind of want to make sure that they know how to be using these platforms. So I think that's one area we've noticed in finances. As we see these trends arise, we're able to sort of pass that on and be like, let's come up with a plan more at a strategic level for the whole company of how we really want to like organize this going forward.
Yeah, I agree. And 2 points. One being our CFO has definitely noticed that AI companies and third parties that we're using today, it's better to get in now if you can, because those costs are only going to be higher in 2 to 3 years, right? So if you can get in a lower base with some of these third parties, in 2 years, it may be 2 times, 3 times the cost, right? So we made a conscious decision to, I think, do our due diligence, choose the right tools out there, try to get in early while they're still relatively cheap. The other thing we noticed is we use Gemini for a lot of things, and within there we have Notebook. Notebook's a great tool for contract review, summarizing FAQs. A couple of our teams, our legal team's been using it, our merchandise team's been using it, and we noticed that in order to take it to the next level, there's an upgrade you need to do, right, to get to the next enterprise value. So it's like a 10x cost from what we're originally doing. So I think a lot of times is like you need to factor in what you're using today. If you're going to continue to increase your AI usage, you have to budget that spend. Our CFO has definitely been doing that. But my one takeaway would be try to get in early if you believe in the tool while it's still relatively cheap. And then those increases in the next few years will be lesser for you than maybe someone else that's using it later.
Really? Okay, so I'm hearing to renew your contracts often and early at Ramp as well. So
Yes, exactly.
Lock in those multi-year deals. It's interesting because you mentioned, I think, Karan, this idea of also like setting guardrails in some places, maybe actually purposefully not setting guardrails when you want the discovery, idea generation, the enablement side. I'm curious which executive teams are driving that conversation for you internally. You're all finance leaders, so I imagine partly, you're in the room alongside your CFOs. Is this driven also by your technology leaders, more from just, your board? And what are maybe some misconceptions they might have about the way that your teams are using AI?
Yeah, I guess to start, first, I think our head of platform engineering has been kind of spearheaded to be the main AI contact. He was the one that was getting us to sign up for the Gemini trainings. And now he's the one that's encouraging everyone to share those experiences they're having across the organization. And he's the one who's also, putting in those safeguards to make sure we're not maybe diving into an AI area where we haven't proven it out yet and we can't rely on it. I think one thing with finance specifically, and Jen was talking a little bit about how she's trying to implement it in some of her accounting processes. The one tricky thing there is auditors, and I'm noticing this in our audits. I was a former auditor in my first lifetime at E&Y years ago, and a lot of their questions they're starting to ask are, how are you using AI? And if we're saying we're utilizing it, how can we rely on it, right? And this is similar to what the trend we saw maybe 10 to 15 years ago when companies moved from manual accounting processes to using systems, and you had to prove out that you can rely on that system, right? So the same thing's now happening with AI. I think this is going to be a tricky thing that a lot of companies are maybe not factoring in, is how auditors can rely on the usage of AI. So just one thing I think is I'm seeing that trend increase now.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think one of the misconceptions we have from the higher ups who are just like, cool, we have these new tools, like you should be able to go fix everything like immediately. And that's just not the case. Like things take time, especially if you want to think it out and like, okay, what are we trying to solve for? Let's make sure we build enough testing time. And then also let's make sure our employees who are using whatever we're building out, or our end users, like have time, bring them along, train them. Again, like not everyone is tech savvy that works at US Soccer. So like specifically when implementing Ramp, it was like, how do we bring them along in this process? So it's not just a crazy new tool they have to figure out how to use. So like phase it out, get feedback. And I think that then adds time to the project, but it's probably better to add that time up front and think through when you're implementing anything new and take that time, because if you rush into it, you might have those unintended consequences, the AI fails. And I think that's just one of the misconceptions of like, cool, the tools are out there, you should be able to go automate everything right now. And it's like, no, like let's be smart about this and like make sure we're doing it the right way.
Yeah, at Clay, I'm not sure I would call it a misconception, but one constant like learning we have is where should we solely like rely on AI as a near autonomous actor versus where should we utilize AI but also have a human in the loop. And so, for example, like when we are engaging with our customers or prospects, we'll often have Clay queue up an auto email after a call, which summarizes some of the takeaways and also proposes the next steps. And for a period of time, we were auto sending those, and we found that sometimes it picked up on some context, but not maybe the core follow-up we wanted to dig in on or something that we wanted to highlight. And so now we have a system where AI still does that work for us and will generate the email, but before it hits send, any rep at our company or GTME can go look in and modify the email before we like hit final send on it. So that's like the constant learning we have, and maybe not a misconception, but leaders are always asking like, hey, should this be fully automated end to end versus where is it actually useful for us to have a little bit more of a touch and maybe experience and exposure to it.
It's funny, you kind of talked about like automated meeting notes. I'm sure that's an area where people in here at this room have kind of explored and experimented a bit. I also get sometimes summaries of meetings that I can't join just automatically sent to my inbox. And for a recent team meeting that I wasn't able to participate in, the kind of like Zoom call notes told me that like my team spent about 15 minutes debating the merits of mustaches as part of the agenda for the team call. So that was just pretty funny. So landed kind of like in the middle of a busy day, which I couldn't be in the meeting. And I was like, oh, good to see everybody's like right on task. But okay, so other things that I've been thinking about, I've been recently, maybe my question here is going to be like teed up, but it's, what are things that you might predict if we were going to reconvene this panel in 2 years that we're not really asking the right questions around, whether it's responsibility around use of AI, whether it's like environmental impacts, or even just the application. So something I've been kind of like noodling over, I this year have started a RFP or proposal program within Ramp, and what I'm noticing is that it's not just the adoption of AI to be to be like, filling in these proposals, which when you're, trying to win bids is a very lengthy process, but a lot of those original like questionnaires are now generated by AI. And then on the vendor side, I'm using AI technology to fill in the vendor questionnaire. And then I'm turning those into my customers who are using AI then to grade the questionnaires. And so you have AI like generating the assessment, completing the assessment, grading the assessment. And one of the questions I had with my conversations I had with my engineers is like, how much should I be tailoring the responses here to be machine graded versus like human read? And I don't know the right answer to that. If everybody like has thought about this as well, I'd love to chat because we want to be winning those bids and of course demonstrating what we do best. But I think, what it kind of comes down to me is like, maybe this is a lot of early thought around like the use of AI as both the market participant and negotiator in this process. And I haven't figured out the conclusion, but I was curious, have you guys, if pie in the sky, just like, what are other things that are in the universe of this conversation that maybe you've been mulling over recently?
I think for me, it's how can we like give a pocket-like AI finance agent to the business. So, hey, you have a question of how am I doing against my budget, or why is my travel favorable or unfavorable? Instead of asking like your FP&A or your business partner, like how can they just ask their finance agent, and they could analyze all the data and come back with the response for them. So I think it's even taking, again, going back to that beginning pyramid, which I loved. It's like getting more into that analytical layer. And then that way, everything is just strategic on the finance side. And you're really going to your FP&A or finance person to ask like the what if type of questions, but having just sort of someone you can talk to in your own language, like, because finance people, we like to get technical sometimes, and the business doesn't always understand that. So how can a business person talk in their language but get the financial results back in a language they also understand as well? I think that would be super cool. I don't know if 2 years, but
translator.
Yeah, exactly. A financial translator who can look into the data and just answer those questions that we get all of the time.
Yeah, we one of the things that we have at Clay is like our sales team can ask like almost an internal bot to analyze deal desk submissions and say, hey, like, is this in line with things we've submitted in the past, or are there any learnings? And that can be kind of triaged before it gets to like a manual person on deal desk at Clay. And so that's been like a really neat step in the right direction. But I imagine 2 or 3 years from now, we might be asking questions of like this bot, almost of like, what are the trends we're seeing, and like, what should we be changing about our deal desk processes, and kind of moving more into the insight versus like just a traditional pattern recognition of what we've done in the past. And so I'm curious to see if we're going to be able to take kind of the next step for ourselves.
Yeah, mine goes back to the auditor involvement. And right now, to prepare like GAAP financial statements, a human needs to create the footnotes and the balance sheet and income statement. But I really do think that as time goes on, AI will be involved in drafting those footnotes if they're not already today. But the real challenge is going to be, how do you get the auditors to rely on, like, what's the manual review that the team is doing to make sure that the disclosures have been reviewed by a human and are ticked and tied to the certain areas. So I do think, like, especially as you go public and you're dealing with 10Ks and 10Qs and S1s, like, there's just going to be a lot of AI involvement in preparing those financial statements.
Definitely. And it's still always this combination of like how we're interacting with technology is what I think is like core in a lot of the responses that I heard here. I know we have a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure there's time for questions from the audience. So I'll go into a little bit of a, lightning round for my last 2 questions here. So for the leaders in this room, what are maybe a resource you recommend or a skill that you recommend everybody build over the next year? And Joe, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I would say, and this is very simple, but even if you're not using AI today as a finance leader, I do think that it's just getting involved in it somewhat. A simple prompt to like draft an email or send out, I recently sent a letter to the Illinois state for our sales tax, and it took me 5 seconds because I just told them exactly what I needed to do, and it drafted it in such a nice way that I sent it to Illinois and they came back with a positive response. So just little things like that you spend time on or you have to do research on. AI can do that for you very quickly. So if you're not using it today, I just encourage you to at least, experiment with it.
Yeah, and I think not only that, but taking it the step further of just like, when it's giving you the answer, I know I mentioned before, but like review it and think critically about it, and don't just trust whatever AI gives you. I definitely think experiment with it if you haven't already, but then make sure you're not just like taking that letter and like sending it without reading it. I'm sure you read through it and you're like, it looks beautiful.
Yes.
So let's go. So that's what I would recommend as well.
Yeah, and I think echoing maybe some of these answers, like there's a muscle in how you engage with AI. And so some of these tools, the way that you prompt and engage it can result in dramatically different outcomes, even with the same underlying like task or query. And so I think there's just an iteration process of how you can get the best output from this force multiplier versus, what you'll probably start with your first time.
Fantastic. All right. My favorite question I prepared today. So I plugged each of our panelists' LinkedIn profiles into ChatGPT, and I asked for Halloween costume recommendations. So I'm going to name for each panel today 2 options for your Halloween costume, and you can tell me which of the 2 is your favorite and why. So, all right, I'm going to go, I'll go down the line. So maybe, Joe, you first. I plug your LinkedIn profile in, and the 2 options you have for you are 1, the Audit Avenger, and number 2, Spreadsheet Samurai, who slices through financials and reporting. Joe, what's going to be your Halloween costume this year?
Oh, wow. The spreadsheet one sounds good. I don't know how I'm going to put that on, but I think it'd be great if somebody actually knew what I was if I tried to dress as that costume. But yeah, we're in Excel so much. I like that one.
You're going to be the guy at the party that has to like explain the costume to every single person. And you're like, I just want a beer. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Jen, the two options on the table for you. Number one, KPI queen. Clean and simple. I like that. Number two was soccer referee of transformation who hands out efficiency cards or budget cuts.
Wow.
I've been working a lot with our referee department lately on a few projects, and I really do think Carrie, our VP of refereeing, would love it if I dressed up as the referee, even if she didn't understand the cards that were being given. But yeah, I'll go with that nice long title. I will also explain.
Yes.
Party, yeah.
Each of these requires like a long
Yes.
note. Yeah. You're definitely all going to love that person. Karan, last but not least here, two options for you. So I have, the first one is the Werewolf of Wall Street.
Great.
And the second one is startup founder zombie, who will wear a hoodie, messy hair, coffee cup, and a pitch deck stapled to your back.
Both of these sound like such good options. But I guess we're close to Wall Street, so maybe we'll go with the werewolf option today.
Werewolf of Wall Street.
Yeah, see that.
Love it. I like the scene where they beat the chest. You got to work on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Phenomenal. Well, we want to open it up to the room. Are there any questions for our panelists today on the topics of AI, finance, or anything else that you've heard?
Thanks. You mentioned that
You mentioned that U.S. Soccer automated like journal entries. What platforms did you use for that? Did you do it through like Power Automate Excel, or did you bring in external things to help you build out that?
Yeah, it's mainly through Power Query and Power Automate, but then we also have someone on my team who's into Python and likes coding things, so he's been able to sort of just pull data daily, save it to a SharePoint, where then we have Power Query reading that data, and then Power Automate transitioning it to another application. So that's kind of the schedule of everything we've done. So it's really just the built-in Microsoft tools that we already are getting from our licenses that we're using to automate things.
What? That was so good, Jen. I like that it was hyper tactical. I felt like I was like visualizing that architecture. So yeah.
Hi, Alan Carr. Joe, this is for you. You talked about also the chat bot that you guys did for APE and just answering the vendors there. Yep. Just curious as well, like how you set that up and what tools. That would be great.
Yep, great question. So within Gemini, I mentioned Notebook. It's a great tool for setting up FAQs. And this is the example I was saying where you have to pay a little bit more to be able to enable like a chatbot. The first team that did it at Zola was our merchandising team to send responses to vendors, typical questions that they can rely on like FAQs. And then we picked it up on AP as well. So highly encourage you to check it out. Notebook is a great tool, not just for that, but also for legal summarizing. If you want to like understand a contract from just like a financial point of view, what are the payment terms? What are the key rev rec terms? It gives a good summary. So, yep, within there. Sure.
I have a question. My name is Athena, Managing Director for Accounting Outsourcing Group. Part of the functions of accounting outsourcing is also provide audit support for clients that another CPA firm will do the audit. So you mentioned, Joe, about the artificial intelligence and the comfort level that an auditor will have. And I don't know if you have done that yet, but as part of the system write-ups that you put and the processes, procedures, where in the old days you will say, Joe will initiate the transaction, Jen is going to approve, the second level with approval would be Audrey, so on and so forth. And it's a whole narrative. Have you already restructured your system write-ups to say, Joe no longer approves, the initiation is AI, but then Jen will review, like how have you structured it, if already you have structured it, so that you give that to the auditors, they're going to question everything, and then they're going to start testing, but at least they have some sort of a roadmap as to the ways your company has incorporated AI.
Yeah, it's a great question, I think. And to answer you bluntly, we really haven't incorporated that in our narratives and our process documentation yet. We're still a private company, not near public company status. So we created narratives and flowcharts in the last couple of years, and I was very happy to do that, identifying key controls. That was our first step. now you're exactly right. Like if we're incorporating AI tools, how are we going to embed that into the narratives? Probably a great way to get the auditors comfortable with it for sure. Identifying, just like you said, manual controls, more review controls on key system outputs, right? So haven't done it yet. Definitely a great idea though. So I agree.
It's coming.
Yep, it's coming.
Yeah. It's such a valuable question. Do any of the other panelists have thoughts on like how to, it's not just getting our own employees and companies comfortable with AI, but also the auditing aspect. Obviously a lot of the way that we implement technology, we need it to be traceable. Is any other input on like maybe how you might approach this?
No, he's just giving me ideas though. I'm gonna go tell my controller of like, have we thought about this for next audit? So appreciate that.
I think the manual checks overlaid with the AI like flow is the right answer. You got to have some redundancies built in. So,
hi. So a lot of these things that we've talked about AI automating seem like they'll change a lot of what more junior employees spend their time on. So I was curious, in addition to kind of growing skills related to AI, are there any other skills that you think junior employees should build to be effective and add value and kind of make an impact with these new tools?
We have a really large kind of like program around like young employees almost out of school who join Clay. And the thing that we're like pleasantly surprised by always is actually how AI forward they are. And so they're constantly actually like on the cutting edge of the different tools out there. And they're also well versed with how to integrate some new tools into their systems. And they've grown up in an era over the last 4 or 5 years with these tools. The thing that we've found valuable in our ecosystem, which is different than other companies, it's like it's a growing startup, so there's always some malleability to it. But with young employees in particular, just be like really flexible and hungry, and like that curiosity can drive you to like different places. It's often hard to know where you're going to start and finish your career, but I think if you're open-minded on trying to add value, trying to like be on the cutting edge of wherever technology is taking you, like those mindsets can actually be really valuable, and you can plug into the next like great work stream at your company, whatever that is.
I would just add understanding data and the principles of data. Like if you can automate some of those routine tasks and processes, like if you understand data structures, what you might need to do with it, then you can take it to the next level and either implement a new process to improve that, or just really be more valuable as a person instead of just like, hey, I'm thinking of our AP clerk right now. If when Ramp automates all of those things away, it's like, okay, what's next? Well, you know our business, you know what's going on. So let's sort of raise you to the next level. Maybe you want to become more of a financial analyst or something like that to really get in and understand a bit more. And I think the backbone of everything is data.
Yeah, well, great point. I think one thing we did with trying to embrace AI within our finance team especially, and a couple of our AP folks were skeptical because they were thinking it was going to replace them, and we were going to eventually that's not the case. It's supplement, but it's development for them as well, right? To be able to not do the same monotonous day-to-day tasks that they've been doing for years. Now they can take it to the next level, be more analysis driven, and can help kind of make decisions that are going up to the CFO, which are just more important, quite frankly, for a company. So I think it's great development for younger employees.
It's interesting. We didn't really talk about on the panel today, maybe some of that fear around like employees thinking that technology replaces their jobs. I think it's so telling that the 3 organizations on stage, and you'll consider Ramp in there as well, are hiring, right? And there's such a war on talent. And so it's almost the opposite, that this adoption and hyper efficiency is driving the need for smarter talent and more specific types of skills, but not that it's actually necessarily the goal at all to reduce, the workforce. I don't know if you want to challenge me on that. Yeah.
I think every employee at Clay has way more leverage than even 5 years ago. And so we actually don't think of this as a zero-sum dynamic. Every employee can just be way more productive and accomplish way more. And so actually to us, every hiring decision today feels like more weighty than it did previously. Like there's just more responsibility on everyone's shoulders and kind of more that we know each person can accomplish. So,
Thanks.
Question for Karan at Clay. Just with, we had Dimitri in the last session talking about how even just knowing what's going to happen 6 months from now is so hard, AI, things moving so quickly. So I'd love to just hear about, how is annual planning and forecasting like really evolved for your organization? Thanks.
Yeah, this has been like an interesting challenge just because of the changing environment outside of Clay, and also because the underlying business is growing so fast. So every like month there can be meaningful adjustments. And so to us, it's just having stakeholders who are attuned and kind of like in lockstep, and then having good data underpinning behind that, where we can see on a daily basis, like, hey, are we missing kind of pace on our PLG motion? Are we like accelerating way ahead? Is something inflecting in the business that we didn't capture previously, which might either, one, require no change at all, but just like awareness, or two, might require change in headcount or spend or some other form of planning. And so I think maybe even a couple of years ago, businesses might have had a more fixed cadence around planning. Now it's way more dynamic. We're always looking at the data. We're always seeing if something is changing in a way that we didn't expect or know. And there's less formality around the way we make changes. If we're seeing something, let's adapt with the relevant teams where we need to. And if not, we can always defer and just like wait and hopefully like see things play out.
Amazing. Any other burning questions? Our panelists will hopefully be able to stay a little bit through the networking hour that's coming at the end of our day. And following today's session, we also have a closing keynote from some of our business leaders, as well as our keynote speaker today. So please stick around. But we are also available now just for more discussion. I do want to wrap quickly by just saying thank you so much, Joe, Jen, and Karan, for this amazing conversation, some fun anecdotes, as well as the insights you're sharing. I think it's brave to also illustrate that we don't really have all the answers. Everybody's kind of figuring this out. So I love the encouragement to say it's never too late to just pick this up and start. I think partly it's just telling people you have to get into the conversation to be part of it. So thank you again to our panelists, and thank you guys for joining today.